What are the skills that you need to become an innovative and creative entrepreneur? Well, to find out, we're joined by INSEAD Professor Hal Gregerson. You're one of the co-authors of a new paper in the Harvard Business Review, a study that you've carried out into innovative entrepreneurship. You found 5 discovery skills. Basically, what are they?
There are 5 key skills that innovators who make a difference engage in every day. It's just a habit, it's a practice, a way of life. And it ranges from how they think to what they do. In their head, it's fascinating. They're constantly putting together things that nobody else typically puts together. We call it associating. And essentially, they put together a piece of something from here, a piece of something from there, and surprise, you've got this innovative new idea.
And it's something like joining the dots.
Exactly. Steve Jobs put it simply, it's creativity is connecting the dots. That's what it comes down to. And it's interesting, if you look at Steve as an example, when he was younger, he was in college, but dropped out of college, but stayed going to school. And when he was there, he was involved with all kinds of calligraphy classes, essentially trying to learn about kerneling and font sizes, and was enamored with the beauty of calligraphy. And he was just in love with what the art of calligraphy was. Several years later, when he was trying to figure out the Macintosh screen and what you see is what you get sort of image, he connected the dots back to what he had learned in calligraphy to what might be on the screen, and it was a key component of making that whole computer work.
So that's associating. What about, say, some of the other skills? Experimenting, questioning, networking?
Absolutely. So essentially, there are behaviors that we engage in that provide the foundation from which we can put new pieces of ideas together. So some of the innovative entrepreneurs were intense observers. Scott Cook, for example, founder of Intuit, when we interviewed him, he talked about how he got the initial idea for Quicken software. He watched really carefully in terms of how his wife was extremely frustrated with doing their finances. They were both equally competent to do the finances. She just happened to be the one who was doing it. But she was frustrated. Manually, it was frustrating and irritating. She purchased some software that was equally frustrating and irritating. And then he's trying to figure out, how might I create a product that could help her solve that problem more effectively? And it wasn't but shortly after that question surfaced in his mind that he went off and he got a sneak preview of the Apple Lisa, where he got a deeper, richer sense of what it might look like to have a user interface and the mouse and so on, and be able to have things on the screen that look like what they should be. And that gave him this image of, wow, I could put checks on the screen as part of this personal financial software and solve my wife's problem and make it an easier package for her to do that job. That observation was the core from which this incredibly successful product came.
So the questioning, and then once you have an idea, basically you need to experiment with it.
Exactly. And so it's partly, and it's interesting you said questioning because there are these actions like observing, like Scott Cook did, or it's experimenting that Jeff Bezos is the master of. Jeff Bezos grew up on his grandfather's farm in the summertime. And his grandfather and grandmother, they never called somebody to fix things. If the tractor fell apart, Jeff's grandpa and Jeff would kind of work it and figure it and experiment and try this and try that until it would finally work again. If the animals had some sort of problem, they wouldn't call the veterinarian. They would actually, again, do some experimentation and be scientists for a moment on the farm and try to figure out, how do we fix this? So Jeff grew up with that kind of attitude and mindset that if I'm confronted with a challenge, I can figure out a solution. That kind of experimentation spilled over into Amazon, where he initially had the idea, which he thought was absolutely fantastic, and it was in one sense, how might we sell books on the internet without inventory? And that was the initial idea that we sometimes forget, but it took them 7, 8, 9 years of experimentation to build the capacity to have warehouses full of books and get the books in the right place at the right time. And it was all those little experiments added up that built this business model that we now call Amazon today.
So in all these processes, there's a lot of observation, but one of the key skills that you see here is networking. How does that work?
Networking typically is perceived as I'm networking for a career, a job, maybe for social life, but this kind of networking in the creativity domain is quite different. It's intentional to find diverse people who are just the opposites of who we are that we talk to get ideas that challenge our own. And so these folks, the innovators, often would literally, they could list 5, 10, 15 people who are completely different in terms of perspective, but they would regularly talk with them about an idea, an option, an opportunity to get a divergent viewpoint. So these people differed around, they were gender differences, industry differences, country of origin differences. It could be age differences. If I'm 40, they were 70. If I'm 50, they were 20. It's wide age variations, political viewpoint differences. If I'm on the right, they're on the left, that kind of notion. And those sorts of diverse inputs in terms of conversations enable them to get new ideas. Now, it doesn't come instantly. Sometimes the conversations provide their own insight. So, if you look at David Neeleman, founder of JetBlue and now Azul Airlines in Brazil, David got the idea for paperless ticketing, e-ticketing. He was the original founder of that, by talking to one of his employees about the frustration of carrying paper tickets around in order to give them to the people flying on the planes. And that conversation then led to a new idea and a way of doing things differently.
So do entrepreneurs who are trying to be, aiming to be innovative, do they need to have all 5 skills, and are they equally weighted?
Great question. Because often when we look at leadership and leadership skills, it's like this flat line of you're supposed to be great in everything notion. And these people were not flatline innovator DNA. They didn't have a flatline innovator DNA in the sense that they were great in everything. So Scott Cook was really strong in observational skills. Mark Benioff, founder of Salesforce.com, he does a lot of networking. You've got, you take Jeff Bezos, experimentation is his forte, and he's really strong at that. Steve Jobs, incredibly strong at associating. And so essentially, the reason why we use the DNA metaphor is just as we each have unique physical DNA, in terms of the creativity domain, we each have a unique set of skills that we rely on in order to get the ideas that will give us some insight.
Well, you mentioned the DNA issue. This article's the innovator's DNA, but isn't it something of a misnomer? Because it's essentially in the piece, you say that 2/3 of it is learning rather than that you have these genetic abilities.
That's a great question, and I hear that often from executives. Why the DNA? Because that would suggest that this stuff is born. We just get it when we come out of the womb kind of notion. And the reality is, if you take identical twins who are genetically coded identically, you separate them at birth not by intention but by accident, it happens, bring them back together when they're adults, have them take creativity tests, about 20–25% of the variance or the difference is attributable to their genetics, which means the other 75–80% comes from the world we live in. And so even if I took those 2 twins, and you have one twin who sits at home, watches the television, doesn't do a whole lot, trying to generate a new business idea. You've got a second twin who talks to 10 different people from 10 different diverse perspectives, who goes out and maybe observes the world systematically, taking notes, taking pictures, writing down in a journal things that he or she sees. They're constantly asking questions, what if, why not, how could, what might, how might, those sorts of things. Which one's likely, which of those identical twins is likely to get the creative ideas? It's the one out there doing the creative actions. And they might get a bit of a boost from the genetic, but that's not the core of what delivers the results.
So what you need to do is essentially ask the right sort of questions, the what-if questions.
Questions are at the core. I might be watching the world. I might be talking with you. I might be experimenting. But if I have no questions in my mind, I'm pretty unlikely to get any observations or insights or ahas that, wow, I never saw or thought about that. And this kind of questioning attitude and mentality, it's just rampant in these folks. They may have differed around, one was more observational, another more networking oriented, but they all were powerful in this questioning domain. I'll never forget when I sat down with A.G. Lafley to talk with him about his world of leadership. And I had a series of questions, and it was related to some research that was going on. And I swear, he asked me far more questions in that interview than I asked him, because he was just simply curious about what was going on there. I think of another example, Michael Dell. When we interviewed Michael, I had the naivete to ask Michael, did he have any favorite questions that he likes to ask when he wanders around the world? And he instantly, responded to me with, "That's like a dumb question, Hal, because if I had some favorite questions, everybody would know the answers." And so his response was, "I'm wandering the world trying to construct a question with every conversation that would generate information that I never had before." And most of these innovative entrepreneurs, that's just how they think.
You've mentioned a number of business leaders in this interview.
Mm-hmm.
Many of them you did interview for this particular
Exactly.
project. Jeff Bezos and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you actually set out the parameters of how you wanted to conduct the study? Because it was a 6-year-long study. Involved surveying something like 3,000 executives.
What we were trying to figure out is there's a lot of work done in the research world around disruptive innovation. One of our co-authors, Clayton Christensen, is the founder of that disruptive innovation notion. And in a conversation early on with Clay years ago, it was around, look, disruption happens. Companies like Southwest Airlines 30 years ago totally disrupted the airline industry. My question with Clayton was, and our question was, what was the origin of those disruptive organizations that changed whole industries? And there was a bit of a, I'm not quite sure where it all started response. And so we then ended up identifying, initially through the Business Week Bain Consulting Group list of the most innovative companies in the world. We looked at that list, which of those are really innovative, and then took that list and started working through them. And interviewed the CEOs in companies that were over 100 years old, or founders, innovative founders for newer companies for which we could still contact the founder.
And then you got the access to people like
And then we got access
Michael
to those
Dell.
people like Michael Dell and basically asked them, tell us about what was going on when you got the initial idea that led to this thing called Dell Computer. Jeff Bezos, the same sort of thing. And as we asked them one at a time that question, and they gave their responses, then we started looking at the interview transcripts and realized they're doing a lot of the same things. A little bit of variation, but a lot of the same things. And that's where we took the interviews then and the concepts around questioning, observing, experimenting, and so forth, translated that into some survey items, and then assessed thousands of executives and entrepreneurs to see, for the not so famous folks like me, do these things also work? And what we discovered was that anybody who engages in these behaviors and this thinking pattern, they're able, well, not able, they were actually the ones who delivered breakthrough processes, new products and services, new business lines within companies, corporate entrepreneurship, new businesses outside of companies. And those were, they got results that actually were financially profitable and successful.
And higher share prices because the company performs better.
And exactly, yep.
Were there any surprises that came out of this?
The surprise would be, it's a great question in the sense that these are things that we say to ourselves once we hear them. Oh, yeah, right. If I were observing carefully, I might get a better idea. If I were doing these things, they seem intuitive. The challenge becomes doing them is counterintuitive. The world most executives and managers live in does not value these actions.
Because they're taking risks.
It's taking risks, exactly. And at the core of this, all of these folks were driven by a fundamental bias against the status quo. They wanted to make things change. And so for Steve Jobs, it's putting a ding in the universe. They just want to change the world. And they're willing to take the risks of failure in order to make that a reality. Now, a lot, again, of corporate decision-making, of the world that managers live in, does not value or support these actions. When was the last time that your boss said to you, I'd like you to go spend 12.5 hours next month just watching our customers? Not pitching things, just watching. But if you look at the marketers at Procter & Gamble, that's what they do. 12.5 hours on average a month. just watching consumers. They value the behavior and they get the innovative results. So one of the surprises for me is that even though these are relatively straightforward things that we could do, most of us have lost the capability to do them.
What would your advice be then to entrepreneurs, business people watching this and thinking, how do I make my company perform better and make it more innovative?
This may sound childish, and it is childish, but it's act like a kid again. Not 100% of the time. That would be absurd. We're adults and we have to run businesses. But 20% of our time, 25% of our time, act like a 4-year-old again. Because all these skills are what 4-year-olds do. They ask thousands of questions. Why? Why not? This and that. You know, they're always asking us questions. Their eyes, their hands, they're always observing and paying attention, almost to the point that it unnerves us. We'll be standing in a line and a 4-year-old will be looking at us like that, and they won't drop their eyes, and you're like, are you going to stop looking at me now? But they're still watching. Or they'll talk to just about anybody. These are the things that we all did as 4-year-olds. And every one of us were 4-year-olds. We all did this stuff. But school systems and then corporate systems, they just say, don't do it, stop doing it, don't, no, no. And we lose the capacity. And the reality is, it's not forever lost. We can get it back. And that's where, if I want to become better at questioning, start asking more questions. If I want to become a better observer, it's not brain science. Go out and observe. Identify a situation, a person, a context, a client, a customer, a supplier. Spend a day with them. Watch, take notes, take pictures. Step back from it. Talk to your people. What did I learn? What surprised you? What was interesting? You know, if you like to talk to people, talk to somebody different. Go to another floor, go to a different building, go to a different office, go to another country, but talk to somebody who's different than you are. These are things that we can do, and they don't take all sorts of time to do them.
But as you point out in the article, it's a question of practice as well, and implementing these processes.
It's a habit. And these innovative entrepreneurs, it's a way of life. It's the fabric of who they are. And for others who aren't that way, it could be, if we choose to engage in the action.
Well, it's a little scary, the idea of CEOs staring at each other as though they're 4-year-olds, but Hal Gregerson, INSEAD professor, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.